first thing we noticed was that the walls were breathing, not moving, not cracking, breathing. Every 11 seconds, a dark red fluid pushed itself through the ancient stones of Blackthorn Manor, swelling between the seams of the 17th century masonry before slowly sinking back into the walls. It looked like blood, smelled like iron, and moved with a rhythm that made every person standing in that underground chamber forget how to breathe themselves. I was there when the first sample was collected, and I still remember the moment the needle touched the surface of the stone. The wall flinched. That was the only word anyone could use. The entire chamber gave a low, almost silent vibration, like something enormous had been disturbed beneath us. The equipment lights flickered, the temperature dropped, and for a few seconds, every person in that vault had the same horrifying thought. The manor knew we were there. Blackthorn Manor had stood in the middle of a forgotten valley for nearly 400 years. It had survived wars, fires, abandoned winters, and decades of rumors. Locals refused to go near it after sunset. They said the house was built on older foundations that did not belong to any known civilization. They claimed the original owner, Lord Elias Blackthorn, had not constructed the manor as a home. He had built it as a prison. For centuries, those stories were dismissed as village superstition. But in 2026, when a restoration team entered the sealed lower levels of the estate, the impossible began. My name is Daniel Mercer. I document unusual archaeological discoveries and unexplained historical events. I had spent years filming abandoned locations, but nothing prepared me for Blackthorn Manor. When I arrived, the restoration crew had already removed the outer barriers around the estate. The manor itself looked almost impossible to ignore. It stood against the gray sky like a wounded animal. The stone walls were covered in black moss. The windows were empty and dark, and the entire building seemed to absorb the daylight around it. The strangest thing was the silence. There were no birds in the trees surrounding the property, no insects, no movement, just the sound of the wind passing through the broken towers. The lead restoration architect, Dr. Evelyn Shaw, met me near the entrance. She was a woman who had spent 20 years studying historical structures, and she had the exhausted expression of someone who had not slept properly in weeks. Before we started filming, she pulled me aside. "You need to understand something," she said quietly. Her eyes moved toward the manor. "We came here expecting damaged stone, hidden rooms, maybe old artifacts. We did not expect the building to produce organic material." I asked her what she meant. She hesitated. Then she showed me the footage. The first video was recorded in the eastern hallway. A thick dark fluid was leaking from the wall. At first glance, it looked like water mixed with rust. But as the camera zoomed in, the liquid moved upward, against gravity. The fluid collected around a crack in the stone and formed a small raised bubble. It pulsed once, twice, 3 times, like a heartbeat. The crew had recorded it for hours. The pattern never changed. Every 11 seconds. "It's been happening since we opened the basement levels," Evelyn said. "The walls are producing it." I laughed nervously because I thought she was exaggerating. She wasn't. The first time I touched the wall, I felt the heat, not warmth. Heat. The stone was nearly 40 degrees Celsius, impossible for a building that had been sealed underground for centuries. The surface felt strangely soft beneath my glove, almost like old skin stretched over something hard underneath. I immediately pulled my hand away. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then one of the workers, Marcus, whispered, "It feels alive." No one corrected him. The deeper we went into Blackthorn Manor, the stranger it became. The lower levels had been hidden behind a wall of stone that showed no signs of construction damage. There was no door, no passage, no markings, just a perfect barrier, until the team discovered the symbols. Carved into the stones were hundreds of tiny lines resembling veins. They spread across the wall and disappeared into the floor. The strange thing was that the carvings were not filled with dust. They were wet. Dark fluid slowly moved through them. When the restoration team cleaned the surface, the lines filled again within minutes, as if the wall repaired itself. During the second day of excavation, they opened the sealed vault. That was when everything changed. The room beneath the manor was enormous, much larger than the building above it should have allowed. The measurements made no sense. The space extended beneath the entire property and beyond. The walls were made from the same dark stone, but they looked different. They were smoother, almost polished, and they were pulsing, not metaphorically. The entire chamber expanded and contracted slightly. The first reaction came from the equipment. Every sensor started producing strange readings. Heat levels rose. Oxygen levels fluctuated. The cameras captured tiny movements inside the stone, like cells. The team collected samples immediately. Nobody wanted to touch the walls directly anymore. The first sample was placed into a sealed container. Within seconds, the fluid began crawling up the inside surface of the glass. It gathered at the top, then it moved sideways, then downward. The container was completely sealed. Everyone watched silently. "This violates basic physics," one scientist said. Nobody answered, because everyone knew he was right. The sample was sent to an independent laboratory for analysis. Until the results returned, the team continued documenting the vault. That was when we discovered the old journals. They belonged to Elias Blackthorne. The pages were damaged, but several passages remained readable. One entry from 1674 said, "The foundation beneath my house is not stone. It is a sleeping thing. It grows beneath the earth and remembers those who enter." Another entry said, "I believed I could control it. I was wrong. It does not serve man, it feeds." The final pages were almost destroyed, but one sentence remained clear. "The house is not haunted. The house is the ghost." That line stayed with me, because after that night, I started hearing things. At first, it was small, a tapping sound inside the walls. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. Like someone knocking from the other side. I blamed the old pipes, the settling foundation, anything logical. But then the workers started reporting the same thing. Marcus claimed he heard his name whispered inside the vault. Another technician said she saw a handprint appear on the stone beside her. A human handprint made from the dark fluid. The strangest report came from Evelyn. She found an old room hidden behind the western wall. Inside was a chair, a table, and a mirror. Nothing else. The room was perfectly preserved. On the table was a photograph that should not have existed. It showed Elias Blackthorne standing beside a group of people. But behind them, in the background, was the manor, and standing in one of the windows was a figure. A tall, distorted shape, something that looked like a person made from stone. The date on the photograph was 1681. The problem was that the manor had not been completed until 1685. When the laboratory results arrived in June 2026, the entire project was immediately suspended. The report stated that the fluid contained hemoglobin-like structures, but not human hemoglobin. The molecules were similar to blood proteins, but the arrangement was completely different. The researchers described the samples as biologically active. The report contained one sentence that terrified everyone involved. The origin of this material cannot be explained through known terrestrial biological processes. The fluid was not blood, but it was closer to blood than anything anyone had ever seen. Another impossible discovery followed. When exposed to normal light, the sample remained liquid, but under synthetic laboratory light, it instantly thickened. Within seconds, it transformed into a dense, rubber-like substance, almost as if it was protecting itself. The scientists tested minerals, geological formations, and known underground phenomena. Nothing matched. The substance contained cellular structures, organic structures. Something was growing inside the manor, and it had been growing for centuries. After the results came back, the restoration team was ordered to leave. But Evelyn refused. She believed the answers were inside the vault. She believed Elias Blackthorne had not discovered something supernatural. She believed he had discovered something ancient, something natural, something that had existed long before humans. On our final night inside the manor, the storm arrived. Rain slammed against the windows. Thunder shook the towers. The power failed just after midnight. We were trapped inside. The emergency lights turned on, but they were weak and flickering. Then the walls began pulsing faster. Not every 11 seconds, every 5, then every 3. The entire manor felt different. The floors vibrated beneath our feet. Dust fell from the ceilings. And from somewhere below us came a sound, a deep, wet movement, like something enormous turning in its sleep. We went back to the vault. The fluid was everywhere. The walls were covered. The stone floor was slick with the dark substance. And in the center of the chamber, something had changed. A section of the wall had opened, not broken, opened like flesh separating. Inside was a tunnel, a living tunnel. The walls inside were covered with the same pulsing material. Marcus refused to enter. He said, "That isn't a room." He looked terrified. "That's an organ." Nobody laughed. Nobody argued, because we all felt it. The manor was not containing something. The manor itself was part of something. Evelyn entered first. I followed with the camera. The tunnel stretched far below the estate. The deeper we went, the warmer it became. The air smelled like iron and wet earth, and beneath that smell was something else, something ancient, a smell like decay mixed with freshly opened soil. The walls moved gently around us. The passage narrowed. Then we found the chamber. At the center was a massive structure embedded in the stone. It looked like a heart, a gigantic petrified heart. It was connected to the entire manor through thousands of vein-like formations. Every pulse moved through the walls. Every pulse fed the house. Evelyn stood frozen. Then she whispered something I will never forget. "Blackthorne didn't build the manor." She touched the wall. "He built it around this." The chamber suddenly went silent. The heartbeat stopped. For 5 seconds, nothing moved. Then the entire structure reacted. The walls tightened, the floor shifted, and a voice came through the stone. Not a human voice, but something trying to imitate one. "Elias," it called the name softly. Then again, "Elias." The sound came from everywhere, the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The thing beneath the manor remembered him. And then it spoke another name, Evelyn's name. She stepped backward. She whispered. The walls around her began forming shapes, faces, hundreds of them, not carved, not painted. Actual impressions beneath the surface. People trapped inside. The manor was not just alive, it was full. The fluid began rising around our feet, moving upward, against gravity, climbing our boots. The camera caught everything. The impossible movement, the faces beneath the walls, the massive heartbeat returning. I grabbed Evelyn and pulled her toward the exit. But Marcus was gone. We found him standing near the heart-like structure. He was staring at it. His expression was calm, too calm. hear it?" he asked. We shouted his name. He smiled. "It's been alone for so long." Then the walls wrapped around him. Not quickly. Slowly. Like roots growing around a tree. He didn't scream. That was the worst part. He just disappeared into the stone. The tunnel collapsed behind us. We ran. The manor shook violently. Doors slammed open and closed by themselves. The walls leaked faster. The entire building sounded like it was waking up. When we reached the main entrance, the front doors were already open. Waiting, we escaped into the storm. The moment we crossed the property line, everything stopped. The rain continued. The wind continued. But the manor became silent again, like nothing happened. The official report later claimed the incident was caused by a chemical reaction and structural instability. The footage was classified. The samples were destroyed. The restoration project was permanently abandoned. But I still have a copy of one recording. The final recording from inside the vault. I watch it sometimes. Not because I want to, because I need to know, oh, I didn't imagine it. In the last few seconds of the video, after everyone has left the chamber, the camera remains pointed at the heart-like structure. The room is empty. The walls are still. Then the stone slowly begins to move. A crack appears. Something pushes outward. A shape, a hand, not human, but almost human. The fingers press against the surface from inside. Then the camera picks up a sound, a whisper. Very quiet, very clear. It says, "Thank you for waking me." And ever since that night, scientists who study the remaining fragments of Blackthorn Manor have noticed something disturbing. The pieces of stone removed from the estate are still warm. They still pulse. And every 11 seconds, they move.